Jams popping YouTube. So another milestone has been hit. 200 subscribers, and it only took a couple of months, so it means the channel's growing, or more specifically 3 videos are growing, because there's exactly 3 videos that seem to be getting views, which is Villain Deep Dive The Crimson King, Villain Deep Dive Cenobites, and then the Shadow of the Conqueror review, which means I probably need to make more Villain Deep Dives if I want to grow this channel. But my Dalek one isn't doing very well. I know a lot of that's to do with the BBC meddling, but anyway, so once again, doing a more fun video, more personable video, and this time it was voted on by the 6 people who voted in the poll I made. And yeah, okay, so you want to know what my top 10 favourite book characters of all time are, which is actually quite a difficult question. When I thought about it, I was like, I know like 5, but 10, it's quite a lot. But I did come up with 10. Okay, I'm just putting it in here because I realised that I didn't actually specify this. There are some rules here. So there are some rules. This character has to have originated in a book. It can't just be a character that's featured in a book. It has to be a character that originated from a book. Because, for example, Doctor Who, like the Doctor, would definitely be on this list because they've been in books, but they didn't originate from a book. They originated from a TV show, so they're not allowed. It has to be a character that first appeared in a book, or whose primary appearance, I guess, is in a book. And we're going to kick it off with number 10. There's a lot of characters that could have been put in this number 10. Some honourable mentions include Benjamin the Donkey from Animal Farm and the Pig's Head from Lord of the Flies, but that actually settled on Patrick Bateman. Most people know Patrick Bateman from the American Psycho movie, but obviously that was based on the book American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. And I don't like Patrick Bateman as a character. Well, that sounds weird. I like him as a character, I don't like him as a person, I guess. But I think Patrick Bateman is one of the greatest satirical characters ever written. But he is the best literary depiction of insanity that I've ever read. He's such a deceptively nuanced character, and the entire book is really nicely portrayed in his voice. I think he's a really, really cool character. I would highly recommend people read that book if you can stomach it. But he never before, I don't think, has a character so aptly expressed the sort of contradiction and juxtaposition of living in society. I think he's a really masterfully written character, and that's why I put him above characters that I actually like. I think he's much more impressive. Number 9 is Holden Caulfield, which is another character I didn't really expect to see on this list, but so I really don't like The Catcher in the Rye, like the book. I think it's pretentious. I think it's way too boring. But I kind of like Holden Caulfield, and I think he's one of the most sort of believable and most accurately depicted teenagers in fiction. And, I mean, despite the fact he is a borderline nonce, but then again, so was J.D. Salinger, so... And Holden's kind of his self-insert, but Holden's such a... Sort of like Patrick Bateman, he's such an interesting character to see the world through his eyes, because that's what you Catch in the Rye is. And I don't think any character has ever quite accurately been able to encapsulate that sort of weird teenage angst and uncertainty and identity crisis. And I also find myself sympathising with Holden a lot when I was younger. The older I get, the more I dislike him, ironically enough. But like the whole people being phonies, despite the fact he himself is a phony. Like, he lies a lot, and I don't know, he's just such a super multi-layered character that's very, very interesting. And people use, like, I've been told on multiple occasions that, like, I remind people of Holden Caulfield, or I used to, which isn't a compliment, but I've been told that on multiple occasions, so I don't know, maybe there's a kinship there, but when I was younger at least. Maybe now, I don't know, can't vouch for myself. But anyway, Holden Caulfield is number 9. I think he's just an interesting character. And, I mean, most people have read Catch in the Rye, because it was assigned in school, but I don't know. I was kind of surprised to put him on this list, but I think he deserves it. Okay, in number 8, this one's a little bit more interesting, and I'm going to have to explain this one a little bit, I think. But Lucifer, or Satan, specifically the one from Paradise Lost. I think Lucifer is as depicted there. I'm not including biblical Lucifer because he's pretty he's a lot less nuanced, but like Paradise Lost Lucifer, which is sort of the basis for the modern depictions of the devil, and then shows like Lucifer or the comics Lucifer's based on or whatever, right? Lucifer is a super interesting character in that he is sympathetic, kind of, but he's not really. You kind of understand who he is. He's this prodigal son, I guess, right? But he's not. Lots of people cite Lucifer as the protagonist of Paradise Lost. I mean, he kind of is, in the same way that Macbeth is the in the same way that Macbeth is the protagonist of Macbeth, or Darth Vader is the protagonist of Revenge of the Sith. Lucifer is, well, one, destined to fail, but two, he is the villain of his own story. His insane hubris, his desire to outshine God himself, and not be content with his standing in paradise, right, is, sad, I think, that he was driven to such envy. And he is kind of the poster child for like gifted kids or teachers' pets kids, really. And then when they get older, they realise that none of their gifts really matter, and being a teacher's pet doesn't matter, and they become really resentful and act out like when they're a bit older. I think that like that's kind of what he represents to me. He is the architect of undoing, and then when he arrives in hell. And I'll probably do a video on Paradise Lost at some point when I actually get through the whole thing, but because it's quite heavy going, but it's a fantastic book from what I've read of it, which is about a quarter of the way through. But anyway, when him and his demons arrive in hell, and he weeps for the fact that he's lost heaven, right? They'll never ever regain heaven, and this just leads him to spite, that he's going to corrupt mankind out of pure spite for the fact that he tasted paradise and now has forever lost it. And instead of trying to atone or ask forgiveness, he sort of doubles down on that. And I think he's a very human character. He sort of ceases to become an angel and becomes more like that which he despises, which is mankind. And you get the idea that there is a real hatred for mankind, because of course we have God's favour. We are God's favourite son now, in the position that he used to think that he occupied. And so as one final act of rebellion to spite God, he is going to corrupt mankind. And he succeeds in corrupting mankind. And he pays the price for it, obviously. I don't know. He's such a layered character for what is effectively, just an embodiment of human sin, or curiosity or whatever. The adversary, as he is depicted in the Bible. But I don't know. I think Lucifer is one of my... Now, I don't really agree with Lucifer. When I was younger, I used to really like... you go through that phase of like, oh, the devil was right and all that kind of thing. And then the older you get, you realise, no, he wasn't. He was a child. And it makes sense as to why children empathise with the devil. Because, the older you get, the more you realise that, no, he is everything that he claims to hate. And he is, nothing to be... He's nothing aspirational. His rebellion was purely selfish and purely spiteful. He didn't do it for some grand, noble cause because he thought God was unjust, right? As he sort of... that's sort of the modern interpretation. But no, he did it out of pure self-indulgence. And I think... I don't know. I could talk about Lucifer for hours. Like, he is just such an interesting character. And for how old that book is, or poem, I guess it is technically, because it predates the novel by a long time. I don't know. It's really good stuff. I mean, I think... Is that the greatest English language work? Paradise Lost? I think it's better than Shakespeare, which I think is controversial, probably. I think in the grand scheme of literary history, it's less important. But I think as an actual single piece, I think Milton surpassed Shakespeare in every metric. And I understand that there's an argument. I'm sort of getting very off topic here, but like there's sort of the argument that it doesn't really hold up because it's like Shakespeare was writing for normal people, whereas Milton was writing for educated people. That sounds bad, but you know what I mean? Like, Milton was, he could be more fancy and intricate. But I think Paradise Lost maybe is the greatest English language work. I don't know. Debate me in the comments. Anyway, moving on to number 7. I put death in here. Specifically Terry Pratchett's death. I would say, most people say Discworld death, but death from Good Omens is basically the same thing. And they butchered him in the show. Holy. That show was pretty good. I never watched season 2 because I think it's an insult to Terry Pratchett's memory that they made a season 2. But the season 1 death was like so disappointing for how funny he was in the book. But death from, I mean, he first appears in Mort, I believe. But he's in stuff like Reaper Man, the death books from Discworld. He's such a funny character. I mean, I love the Grim Reaper. I mean, my channel icon's a skeleton. Like, I mean, come on. I love all that kind of iconography and the death thing. But he's just such a fun, captivating character. I could just read a story of death that's going about his everyday life for hours. Like, just the scenes where he's cooking or getting his head polished at the barber's, and I don't know. He's just. And the fact he always talks in bold, with no speech marks. And then when Mort learns to do that, like, I don't know, it's fantastic. Death is just... If you've read any of the Discworld books, or any of Terry Pratchett's books that feature death, you'll know what I'm talking about. He's definitely a fun character. Having seen how long I rattled on about Lucifer for, I do think Lucifer should have been much higher on this list. But anyway... Moving on to number 6. This is one that's, I think, will surprise a lot of people because he's barely in the book that he's famous for. But it's Mr. Kurtz from Heart of Darkness. I love that book. Heart of Darkness. For those of you who've seen Apocalypse Now, that's basically just Heart of Darkness except in Vietnam. But Mr. Kurtz is such a fascinating character. And he's barely in it. And when you do finally see him, he is on his deathbed. So basically, Kurtz is this English explorer. At least I think he's English, and he's gone into Africa, whatever. And he's sort of away. He's gone mad, and he set himself up as god to this African tribe using his guns and stuff like that. And they worship him as a god. And then the main character has been sent by the crown to fetch him and bring him back to England. There's something just so poetic about Mr. Kurtz, and I, when I was younger and I read that book first, I really liked Kurtz. I was like, he's a cool character, because he is kind of the apotheosis of humankind, of our desire to play God, but at the same time he is a commentary on what God is to us, right? God, for all we know, could be just some random guy of whatever celestial species he is, and because he's so far more advanced than us, we worship him as a god. I mean, this is the basis for pretty much any sci-fi story where gods are just aliens with super high technology. It all comes back to Heart of Darkness, and Kurtz is just such a... I think because you know so little about him makes him so much more interesting. But I don't think many characters have had such a sort of effect on my have been such a almost earworm character than Mr. Kurtz, because you know so little about him. You never really speak to him. He's just this... You hear a lot about him, and he's just this enigmatic figure of I don't know. Anyway, that's Mr. Kurtz. It's kind of hard to put into words, but fantastic. If you haven't read Heart of Darkness, I would highly recommend reading it. It's a fantastic book. Okay, the top 5. These 5 are a little less literary, I guess. These are a lot more like... these are the 5 that I rattled out originally when I was like, oh yeah, 10 favourite characters, and then the other 5 I was like, I gotta think. So another 5, we have Destiny of the Endless from the Sandman comics. I mean, I guess technically originally he was from some DC anthology, but he, like, the characterization in the Sandman comics. I love Destiny. He was by far my favourite of the Endless. He was the least human, I guess, of the Endless. But he's such a cool idea of having a character that knows everything that's going to happen and knows that he is bound to just read from his book for everything that's going to happen, and he has really no control over it, but he knows that he's fated to have no control over it, right? Like, he's burdened to know everything that's going to happen, and he can't do anything to stop it. It's such an interesting idea for a character. There's something to me that just makes him more captivating than the other Endless. And I understand, like, he's the oldest, and I'm the oldest of my siblings, so there's some camaraderie there. But, and then, because it's interesting, like, when you talked in like, Overture, for example, where Dream speaks to Mother Night, and she says that Destiny's the only one who comes to visit her anymore. But, like, he has to. It might not even be because he wants to, like... He has to want to, because he's right. Like, he's an interesting. I don't know. You lose yourself in that sort of logic of what he is. He's a fascinating character, and I loved him. He was my favorite Sandman character, and he was originally the bookend of Sandman before they did Overture as well. In Endless Nights, he was the last story in that book, which was kind of nice to sort of shelve the story with him. And his introduction is fantastic. Walk through his garden where the Furies show up, and I don't know. He's just got a cool design, which is with the brown cloak in the book, chained to his arm. Very easy cosplay. And, yeah, I don't know. Destiny of the Endless. My favourite Endless. Okay, number 4 we have Rorschach from Watchman. I talked more about him in my Watchman review. Rorschach is lawful stupid. Now, I sort of liked him originally because I was an edgelord and was like, oh yeah, Rorschach's great. But then I get older, I'm like, no, Rorschach's such an interesting character because he is so stupidly selfless. He is you know those, the memes you see of, like, you know, you try to jaywalk in Gotham and Batman just shows up and beats the shit out of you? That is literally Rorschach, right? Like that's the type of stuff that he does. You have this character that is so committed to justice that he will do anything. He's such a black and white that he doesn't care about the outcome of his actions. He has to be right. He has to prove that he's in the right, and he has to prove the villains were wrong. And I always liken Rorschach to the trolley problem. You know, the one where you have the trolley is going down the track, there's a bunch of, like, 5 workmen on the track, they're going to get hit. You have the points, and you can switch it to hit one guy on a different track. Do you do it? So in that book, Ozymandias, the villain, would do that. That's what the whole book's about. But the question is, someone was like, what would Rorschach do? And Rorschach would literally throw himself in front of the train in a vain effort that would stop it, knowing full well that he's going to die. Even if and knowing it probably won't save the people. But he would just refuse to do anything. That's the type of character he is. And I mean, he's an insane conspiracy theorist. Like, he is basically if Alex Jones was a superhero, and I'm all there for it. So, Rorschach is definitely one of my favourite characters. Number 3, we have Gandalf. I could just end it there. But Gandalf's a really cool character. He's like the Christ allegory in Lord of the Rings, I guess. The fact that you have this wizard of supreme cosmic power who's tasked with defending the universe, and he instead falls in love with the hobbits and goes and smokes weed with them on the weekends, and that's what he does to himself. Whatever floats your boat, Gandalf, I guess. But, I mean, he's such a... I don't know, I can think of like a billion Gandalf quotes, and I'm sure half of them aren't even from the books. It's been so long since I read Fellowship. But, like... It's Gandalf. Like, he's definitely up there. He is the quintessential wizard. He is everything Dumbledore wishes he was. And, yeah, he's going to be on the list. Okay, so now we get to my top 2 characters, favourite characters in anything. And it's kind of weird to have these 2 as number 1 and 2, because they're both from the same book. and they are the hero and the villain of said book. Well, the villain and the anti-hero, I guess. So anyway, in number 2 we have Walter O'Dim from The Gunslinger, well, the Dark Tower series, or you might know him as Randall Flagg from The Stand and Eyes of the Dragon, sorry. Anyway, he is the Man in Black from, The Man in Black fled across the desert and The Gunslinger followed. The Dark Tower is my all-time favourite series. That was such a roller coaster of a series. I'll never forget it. It was... I don't think a greater literary achievement has happened since Lord of the Rings. I think it is the greatest... I think it is the second best fantasy series of all time. And I think it is the greatest American fiction series of all time. And I think Dark Tower is so interesting, I will do a video on it one day maybe. Because it is a purely American fantasy. Lord of the Rings, and most people now, they so heavily from European culture, which makes sense for, well, if you're a European, I am, I guess, but, Tolkien at the time, right, he was basing it off of folklore from Europe and things like that. We're seeing now, a whole bunch of new, you're getting Asian works coming in, Africans, all that kind of thing, and you're bringing in all this really cool culture and mythology to the fantasy landscape that didn't exist before. But America sort of gets the short end of the stick, because they just kind of do, most Americans just do the epic, European fantasy, which Stephen King didn't do that. And when you look at The Dark Tower, you're like, hell yes, this is such an interesting idea. But it really dawned on me, when I was reading, I was like, this is the American high fantasy. And I love America. I'm not American, but, I think America is such a fascinating place. You have so many different cultures coming together to create this weird, unholy amalgamation of humankind in the United States, and it's such a weird place, but it's so wonderful. But so instead of knights and things, what do you have? Cowboys, right? The gunslingers are the knights or the wizards or whatever, right, of their story. And what is the American mythology? Well, it's cowboys and Indians, right? It's there's no Indians in this one, but Native Americans, or I don't know what the correct PC term is at this point. In Canada we call them the First Nations. I don't know what the Yanks call them, but anyway, you know what I mean. And so it's such a cool idea. But anyway, and the Man in Black though is kind of out of place in this world, because he is a very sort of Euro style villain, in the fact that he is a wizard in a black cloak and he does tarot readings. I know that sort of gets retconned later when he's the victim of a lot of retcons. I should probably do a villain deep dive into him, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Because originally when Stephen King wrote The Gunslinger, he was one character, and there was another character that he worked for, and then they did a revised version where those two characters were combined into one, and then he became also Randall Flagg from The Stand, and Randall Flagg is a lot more American kind of fantasy villain to Walter. But his real name is Walter O'Dim. But anyway, and so he is working for the Crimson King, but he's also trying to undercut the Crimson King. Basically, he wants to enter the Dark Tower and gain control of reality, which is, he sort of foils the Gunslinger in that respect. But he's such a interesting character. He is so animated, and he's just such a captivating villain, such a captivating force for the brief time he shows up in the Dark Tower. I loved this character when I was reading it. He is everything you want in a fantasy villain, and to be fair, he got a really terrible send-off. They replaced him with a terrible villain. He gets, spoiler alert, he gets killed by the sort of main villain for book 7, and he would have been so much better as the villain. I don't even know. But he's a pinnacle of so much stuff, and he's got so many contradicting... He feels like a real mythological entity, because he has so many contradicting origins and deaths and stuff like that. He even shows up in the Gwendy's trilogy, I guess you could call it, that Stephen King and Richard, whatever his name is, wrote. I don't know. Fantastic character. And I kind of gave it away, but my number one favourite character from a book of all time is Roland of Gilead from The Dark Tower. I have never liked a protagonist as much as Roland. he goes through so many character moments, from the guy who would let a kid die in book 1 to fulfill his goal, to the sort of father figure that we see at the end of book 7, only to have the horrible fate of having to redo everything because he's stuck in a time loop. And you're just like, spoiler alert. I'm going to put a spoiler warning at the beginning of this video. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know quite how to explain why I like Roland so much. I feel like I really went on a proper journey with him through those 7 books. And, 8 if you count One Through the Keyhole. And, it's Stephen King, so he feels like such a real person, but he is everything I personally wanted at the time in a fantasy protagonist. And I don't know how to explain it, but he's my number 1. So this video is now over, I guess. This is a very rambly one. I didn't write a script for this or anything. I just listed my 10 characters, and some of them it's just like a gut feeling of just like this character is there. Right? Others of them I could talk about for ages, like Lucifer, for example. So that's it. That's my top 10 favourite book characters of all time. What are yours? Let me know in the comments section below, and thank you very much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, etc. And thanks for 200 subscribers. Let's get 300 and then 400, and you get the idea. Thank you very much.